Dave. Thursday's political panel, we are delighted to be joined by Antonia Jennings, political commentator. Antonia, good afternoon. Welcome to Talk Drive.
Afternoon, thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. And also Bill Bowkett, a reporter at Reaction and political commentator, I can't say it, with Young Voices UK. Bill, how are you?
Very good, Jeremy.
Antonia and Bill, welcome to the show. We have spoken about Boris Johnson till the cows come home. Can we talk about these accusations today from William Ragg about blackmail? Apparently, if you've put your letter in, if you're anti-Boris, the whips are threatening this, they're threatening that. The whips have always been a sort of clandestine bunch of people doing their jobs in the dark corridors of power. Do we believe, Antonia, William Ragg, or do we just think this is another person trying to put the boot into Boris Johnson? Where do you stand on this?
Well, we'll have to see if an investigation is launched and obviously what that investigation concludes. But I think the thing to say here is that prime ministers throughout history have used underhand tactics to get MPs to support them on contentious issues.
Yep.
This might be, for example, around a promotion or getting a knighthood or something to do with the party funding. What makes these allegations different is that William Ragg is claiming that some MPs have been told that their constituencies will lose government funding if they don't back the PM. And this would amount to using public money for political advantage, which, if proven true, would be grounds for, a corruption claim being lobbied at the government.
What did you think about this today, Bill? What was your take?
I think it's very much true in the sense that the whips offices existed for, decades, and they've used often, as Antonio mentioned, tactics, often around the ideas of promotions, constituency offices, and members of parliament have spoken out about the past about whips, especially chief whips, using intimidation tactics. Peter Bone said, who's a member of the awkward squad, as we would call, on the back benches, says that often whips are accustomed to swearing at members of parliament and almost trying to force them to get into the chamber to vote on a bill backed by the government. But this feels very different to me because what William Ragg is saying here, we must remember Ragg is an extremely experienced parliamentarian. He's chairman of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee and also vice chairman of the 1922 committee. So he knows how these things work. And he's essentially accused Boris Johnson and his whips of breaking the ministerial code and encouraging members of parliament, if they have been intimidated, especially around constituency funding, to go to the Metropolitan Police. And I'm worried that what we have from here is that it could even go further, and we might even have another investigation by the Standards Committee. But the thing is that Boris might then be let off the hook because that will be then the responsibility of his whips.
I can't get over the fact that all of these people... Listen, don't get me wrong. I will say to you both what I've said all week. I think that a lot of what's happened has been foolhardy, wrong, disrespectful and unnecessary. My frustration is that an 80-seat majority with a clear mandate from the British people is in danger of being flushed down the bog. And there is a party, by the way, in opposition who are now in front. And you will not convince me, I don't care what anybody says to me. Every Labour MP I've had on bar one has not been able to ask the question, are you keen really to get us back into Europe? Patently they are. What I will say is this, Boris Johnson is on the ropes, but we'll move to the Christian Wakeford defection yesterday. Not only do I think he betrayed his constituents, and I think it's a disgrace in terms of the way that we run that sort of thing, and he was behind, by the way, a bill that's going through Parliament. He sponsored it that says there should be a by-election if that happens. But it didn't work for Keir Starmer, and it hasn't worked for Christian Wakeford, and it's actually provided a bit of solace for Boris Johnson. And all the people who are out with their knives, understandably, Bill, I'm not sure whether they're going to succeed in the short term. Are you, my friend?
Well, what we saw after he defected is that many backbench MPs asked for their letters to be handed back to them.
Yeah.
So because there's...
Are you allowed to do that, by the way? That's allowed, right?
Yes, you are. You are allowed to do them. And even with the new system, with now you're able to send your email via email address, not just in a post. But I do feel that this decision could backfire because not only is it almost feels like Wakefield is obliged to now stand again as a member of parliament, because remember that specific election, 2019, in many ways it was a revolt against the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn, and on the premise around Brexit. It was a clear choice to many people. And while members of parliament in itself, as Edmund Burke would say, are cross candidates, they're independent minded, they're free thinking. People vote for members of parliament not necessarily because of the candidate, but because they vote for the party themselves. And he will need that mandate. And there was a very good report today in The Guardian speaking,
It was a good report in The Guardian. A good report in The Guardian.
But this is important because even though maybe it's good to read a wide array of publications, as I must say, it's important in this sense because they went up to Prestwich, a town in his constituency, and the overwhelming consensus is that he should stand for office again.
Well, I can tell The Guardian, which is not a very popular newspaper, let me tell you, but I can tell The Guardian that we had on the most astonishing Antonia caller yesterday, who was Jilly, and she came on, single mum, does 2 jobs, and she was absolutely raging. This made all the papers say raging and shaking with anger. She felt very strongly that her vote had been stolen. She voted and said, I felt very strong about this because here's the thing. Whether I want Boris Johnson out now or not, I believe that's my right as a voter. I voted for Christian Wakeford on a Tory manifesto, and how dare he to save his backside because he knows his boundary is only at 411 seats or his majority. How dare he now tell me that I'm being represented by a Labour MP? There is some importance in that, Antonia, isn't there?
There absolutely is, and I completely understand why she feels like that. And I think the Wakeford defection also needs to be seen in the wider context of what's going on in politics at the moment. And frankly, democracy in this country is in absolute crisis. We have a PM who doesn't know if he went to his own party, doesn't know if his own rules were followed, and prior to that, we've had a year of contracts being given to mates. We've had broken promises around 40 new hospitals, the levelling up agenda. The list goes on. And trust in democracy desperately needs to be restored. Labour lost this seat in 2019, and it's crucial that Labour prove they can win this seat and not automatically get candidate. Wakeford himself, as you mentioned, supported a bill back in September that supported by-elections in the case of defections. And for the people of Bury South, for integrity in politics, and for the reputation of the Labour Party overall, a by-election absolutely has to be called. Wakeford stood on a manifesto of Conservative aligned principles, was voted in, and if he now supports Labour aligned principles, which is also, in question or should be questioned.
But here's my point. If he now, what do his constituents think? That's my point. There was no checking with his constituents. If they'd held a meeting or asked the constituents, should I defect? Absolutely, but he didn't. He's done this, and I genuinely. And he interviewed this was brilliant. I don't know if you saw this today, team. He interviewed his new leader or introduced his new leader on stage today and got his name wrong, called him Sakir Lama, for God's sake. Literally. That's not a great start, is it? Can I talk about, is it too soon for Plan B to end? I mean, if you sit here every day like I do, I hear all the people saying, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, and when it's done, they'll go, I don't want to do that now. You can't please all the people all the time. Bill, where do you stand on these Plan B restrictions being ended starting with next Thursday? Is this just a desperate attempt by Boris to placate the British people, or is it time?
No, it's definitely time. I mean, these restrictions were only going to be in place until the 26th of January anyway. And as many members of Parliament have been saying, and now the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, is that we cannot eradicate this virus. We just have to live with it and treat it like any other disease or flu or sickness and so on and so forth. Because you've got to think of the trade-offs here, but putting these restrictions in place, but then also the benefits, especially at a time when inflation today is now at 5.4%. You have many businesses that are struggling deeply given the lack of business that we had over the Christmas period because of the Plan B restrictions. And also, I think now what you'll see, especially in the come up, because there is still going to be some things in place. I think the ending point is probably going to be July, when free tests are going to be scrapped, and that people would then have to go to a pharmacy and pay a certain amount of money for a certain number of tests. But now what it's going to be is taking more personal responsibility. Is that if you feel that you have coronavirus, isolate, if you are worried about transmitting people in a crowded place, wear a face mask if you want to, but don't force people into doing it.
Sorry, thanks, Bill. Antonia, I mean, there comes a point, surely, where it's suffocating the economy and it's taken away human rights, and for God's sake, can we live with it and all just get on with it and take responsibility for our lives, and please, can we just get on, right? That's got to be the way.
So we're entering our third year of this virus, right? And we need to stop, as a society, lurching from package of emergency measures to package of emergency measures, right? The virus isn't going anywhere. It's not going to be 2 months down the line, we're going to get to a point where coronavirus is finished, everything's back to how it was in 2019. So you're absolutely right. We need to start having that conversation around what our kind of longer term arrangement is with COVID. So that's around new types of working, that's around, new types of traveling, new types of living together. And also, as you said, government needs to be giving that kind of longer term signalling to business to build up confidence and enable business to get back to making longer term plans around jobs, around, training, around investment. However, the one thing I would say about Plan B ending is 2 days ago, we had 400 deaths from this virus, right? Which was higher than when Plan B was introduced. So I think it's reasonable to question as to whether Plan B is ending for healthcare reasons or political reasons. If it's political reasons, that's an incredibly irresponsible way to be managing a pandemic. As I said, in its third year, it's inevitably going to lead to more cases, which is going to put higher pressure on the NHS, which is already at breaking point. So I think questions need to be asked around the timings of this, but also we need to be starting that longer term conversation around how we live with this virus.
Completely agree. Right, final for both of you, 2 very quick questions. Dave, just give me 1 sec. Antonia, Bill, does Boris Johnson resign or go? If he does, who replaces him? Go, Antonia.
I think it's inevitable that Boris Johnson will be resigning. It's a question of if and not when. I mean, who his replacement will be obviously remains to be seen. Liz Truss is...
Just put a name in there for me. Come on.
Well, I mean, I'm not a supporter of the Conservative Party, so, it's hard for me to say who I'd want. I suspect it may be Liz Truss. OK,
Bill, does he go? And who replaces him?
To me, I don't think he'll resign. I think he'll be ousted, most likely. And who the most likely candidate is, I mean, the top 2 favourites is either Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss, but I'd say a dark horse is Nadhim Zahawi, I think.
Interesting. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Antonia. Today's political panel, 03